Hello friends, welcome again. Students, in today's video lecture, we are focusing our discussion on WB Yeats as a modern poet. If you are studying 20th century English literature, if you are studying what modernism is, if you want to get some basic knowledge about modernism, then this video lecture is going to be helpful to you. William Butler Yeats, who is considered as the one of the most important poets of the 20th century English literature, he is rightly considered as the last romantic poet and the first modern poet of English literature, who was born in 1865 and died in 1939. So he lived in two different ages. He lived towards the end of Victorian era. He also lived in the beginning of the modern age. So that's the reason why both these characteristics are visible in his poetry. We find Victorianism, we find Romanticism, and also we find modernism in his later poems. He has been considered as an influential poet who has influenced so many number of other contemporary poets like T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, W.H. Auden, and so many others. Even after 1940s, after Yeats' death, there are hundreds of poets who have taken inspiration from Yeats' poetry. Yeats has been considered as a master artist of modernism. What are his famous poems? This you can see on the screen among school children: the Stolen Child, Sailing to Byzantium, A Prayer for My Daughter, An Irish Airman Forces His Death, Leda and the Swan. These are some of the most outstanding poems written by WB Yeats. Now, see, as a historian or as a research scholar, if you examine the whole literary career of WB Yeats, then you can see that Yeats as a poet has developed from time to time. We find three major stages in the evolution of Yeats as a great modern poet. W.J. Long, who is this man? W.J. Long is a very popular, famous, and very important and authentic historian of English literature. He has also said that in 50 years, 50 years means he is saying about the 50 years of his career as a poet. In this 50 years in his career, he evolved from a dreamer to a realist, and from a realist to a passionate metaphysical seer. Seer means saint. So you find three stages. In the beginning of his career, he was a romanticist. Later he becomes a realist, and then in his last stage of his life, the poems which he has written are highly metaphysical. So these three stages we see in his career. Let's have a look at all these three stages one by one. The first stage is till 1900. The poems which he produced, which he wrote till 1900, there you find the dreaminess, you find picturesqueness and mythological love of the pre-Raphaelite poets. Remember the pre-Raphaelite poets who were popular during the Victorian era. So Victorianism and Romanticism of the pre-Raphaelite poets, that influence you see in his early poems. The Wandering of the Oisin, The Wind Among the Reeds, and The Shadowy Water, all these are best examples of Yeats as a romanticist in the beginning of his career. The second stage comes after 1900. 1900 onwards, you find a huge change, a drastic change in Yeats' attitude towards life and towards literature. Okay, now he is no longer a dreamer. He does not escape from the hard realities of life. Why? Because he was the witness of the First World War, which started in 1914. So 1914 onwards, you find that Yeats has mainly focused on the harsh, crude realities of life, and this realism you find in the Green Helmet and other poems published in 1910. So that is the second stage. The third stage, after the First World War, okay, there also his attitude is changed. Here you find him as a gloomy person, as a sorrowful and distressed person, and that's why he achieves a kind of philosophical height in his poetry. It's kind of spiritualism, kind of philosophical thoughts, which are very complex thoughts, are presented by him in his later poems. The Tower, published in 1928, the New Poems, published in 1933, and the last poems published in 1939. They speak of Yeats' change in attitude to life. So three phases, remember: the first phase of Romanticism, second phase of Realism, and third phase of philosophical thoughts presented in his poems. Okay. Now, another important thing to note about WB Yeats is that you find both the things, as I told you in the beginning, traditionalism and modernism both are visible in his poetry. Romanticism and realism go side by side, hand in hand in his poetry, and that's why I told you he started his poetic career as a romantic poet, as a pre-Raphaelite poet, but later on he turned to be a modern poet, and that's why the realism of modernism is found in his poetry, and at the same time romanticism of Raphaelites is also found. Okay, all the romantic traits found in Yeats' early poetry collapse, okay, in his later poems. His later poems are highly realistic, okay, in the memory of Major Robert Gregory and the Wild Swans at Cool. All these things, all these poems speak about his love for realism. But in his early poems, we find the spell of fairies, ghosts, magic, escape from the reality of life, dreaminess, picturesqueness, all such qualities you find in his early poems. So, realism and romanticism, traditionalism and modernism, both are found in his poetry. Another feature in his poetry is pessimism and frustration. If someone asks you what are the features of modernism, this is one of the features. Okay, frustration, loss of hope, pessimism. These are some of the features of modernism, and that's why we consider Yeats as a modern poet. Why? Because there we find the effect of this post-war modern world. Okay, the modern world after the First World War was full of disorder, in a disordered condition, in a chaotic situation. This chaotic situation and disorder of the modern world has been represented by Yeats in his poetry. You find frustration, you find boredom, anxiety, and loneliness of modern man presented very well expressed in his poems. The Second Coming, one of the important poems written by Yeats, I have taken these lines. Read these lines. Turning and turning in the widening gyre. Gyre means a kind of circle. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Okay, falcon means a bird, a prey bird, which kills others, kills other birds. Okay, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Means all things are in disorder. The center cannot hold. Nobody can control this situation. Mere anarchy. Anarchy means disorder. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. So this picture, which is a gloomy picture, which is a picture full of frustration and grief, has been presented by WB Yeats in his poem The Second Coming. If you read his another poem, To a Shade, there also you find this pessimism. He expresses these feelings. You had enough of sorrow before death. है ना, लाइक कई बार हम बोलते हैं कि ये जीना भी कोई जीना है. ओके, सो वी हैव इनफ ऑफ सोरो इन आवर लाइफ बिफोर डेथ. अवे अवे you are safer in the tomb. Tomb means qabr. Okay, the poet wants to say that modern man is not safe in his life. He is not feeling safe in his life. He remains safe only inside the tomb, inside that qabr. Okay, so that is called pessimism of the modern man presented by Yeats in his poetry. Another important feature of Yeats' poetry is the use of symbol. In fact, Yeats has been considered as one of the leaders of the movement of symbolism during the modern period. Modernism, I told you, if someone asks you what is modernism, then you can say modernism means symbolism. Okay, it is symbolism is one of the features of modernism which you find in Yeats' poetry. It is rightly said about Yeats' poetry that dumb things are given voices and bodiless things are given bodies by the use of symbols by WB Yeats. Okay, he has taken some symbols from Greek mythology, from ancient folklore. He has taken symbols from philosophy and metaphysics. His important symbols are the rose, the swan, Helen. These are some key symbols which are found in all poems. Okay, it is not like one symbol is presented in one poem, but the same symbol is repeated in the another poem also. Okay, so these are some key symbols presented by WB Yeats. Mysticism is also one of the features of modernism which you see in Yeats' poetry. Okay, and that makes him a modern poet. Okay, you see, modern age means 1900 to 1940 or 45, the first half of the 20th century. This first half of the 20th century is no doubt considered as the period of science and technology, but still, mysticism was available in literature, in produced during this period, and Yeats has presented the occult ideas, like magical powers. Such things are presented and which are quite mystical. Okay, mysticism you find running throughout all his poetry, in which the gods, the fairies of the Celtic mythology, ancient mythological figures are presented by him. If you read the poem Sailing to Byzantium, which is again very popular, read this line: unless soul clap its hands and sing. Now the soul cannot clap, but kind of mysticism by writing such lines, he makes the soul a living personality. Okay, so that is mysticism. Another important feature is humanism in Yeats' poetry. Humanism means, you have a feeling for the other human beings. Okay, when you are living in bad times, not good, when you are not having good times, and when you feel intimacy with some other human beings around you, you do something good for the others, that is called humanism. So humanity brings humanism, the element of humanism. In the beginning of the 20th century, I told you it was the period of the First World War. It cast a gloomy shadow on the poetic sensibility of most of the modern poets, and the sad realities of life made some people humanitarian. Okay, a kind of humanitarian approach developed among the people. Man was helping the other man. Okay, so this humanism you find in his poem Easter 1916. This is the title of his poem. There you find this poem. He expresses his feeling even for his rival, his enemy. He says he had done most bitter wrong to some who are near my heart. Okay, so even the person who has done wrong to me, I have feelings for, I have attachment, emotional attachment for that person. So that is called humanitarianism or humanism. Okay, the last important thing to note about Yeats' poetry is obscurity. Obscurity means, it's very difficult to understand his ideas presented by Yeats. That makes him an obscure poet. Complexity, complex ideas are presented which makes him a difficult poet. Now the question is, such a great poet, how can you say that his poetry is obscure poetry? How can you say that there is complexity in his poetry? But let me tell you, it is because of his occultism, it is because of mysticism, and it is because of his presentation of Irish mythology and too much use of symbolism. All these things make him a difficult poet. Okay, and not only this, he has placed two opposite ideas together sometimes. Okay, like you can say the hot ice cream. When someone says hot ice cream, it doesn't enter properly into your mind, and you find it difficult to understand how can ice cream be hot. Such juxtaposition, oxymorons or opposite ideas are mostly presented by Yeats in his poetry. The past and the present, the spiritual and the spiritual and the physical, all ideas are yoked together in his poems, and that makes him a difficult poet. Okay, so now let me conclude by saying that WB Yeats, William Butler Yeats, was the last romantic poet, but you can say the first modern poet of English literature who lived in the towards the end of Victorian age and in the beginning of modern age. He is in fact a link between Victorianism and modernism, between Romanticism and modernism, and he is the master artist who has influenced hundreds of other poets during his times. Okay, his poetry is known by too much use of mysticism and symbolism, which makes him a difficult poet also. Important thing to note about Yeats is that he won the Nobel Prize in 1923, which itself confirms him as a great modern poet. So here we come to the end. Please do let me know if you have any questions. Write to me in the comment section of this channel, and please do let me know if you like it. Show your liking in the comment section, and if you don't like it, again there also you can write to me. Thank you for watching. Thank you.